Hey guys, tonight we drift beneath the velvet shadows of Versailles, where the air smells faintly of beeswax polish, and the ghosts of powdered wigs linger in the damask curtains. You can almost taste the spiced wine as you slip past columns of flickering candles, each flame a tiny scandal waiting to be discovered. Your steps hush across the marbled floors, while somewhere in the darkness, a secret rendezvous curls itself around a sigh. You probably won't survive this. Too many hearts have been dashed to ribbons in these chambers. So, before we drift any deeper, if this hushed little corner brings you even a flicker of calm, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right in your chest. Wherever you are, drop a comment with your location and the local time. Let's see how far this gentle web reaches. Now breathe slow, let the weight fall off your shoulders, and sink with me into tonight's slow unravelling of the past. Right here on Historian's Diary. You trudge softly down the hall of mirrors, careful not to let your reflection give you away. Tonight, Louis XIV is hosting yet another masquerade, and the walls themselves seem to buzz with rumour. The Sun King is nowhere in sight, but his courtiers gleam like exotic birds, powdered, perfumed, and restless. You watch as a duchess with a jade mask dips a curtsy to a nobleman, who answers with a gaze that slides right past her, settling instead on the young man behind her shoulder. It's an open secret that the king's favour can swing in any direction. That elaborate dance of alliances and whispered trysts is the real currency here. Just yesterday, someone tucked a note beneath the velvet cushion of a gilded chair. "Meet me in the orangery at midnight. Come alone." You wonder who wrote it, and who read it with a flutter in their chest. The orangery smells of citrus and damp earth. As you slip inside, your skin prickles at the thought that Louis himself has stood here, wrapped in a brocade cloak, pressing a kiss to whichever lips pleased him most that evening. This garden was the perfect cover, hidden from the candelabras, a place where titles dissolved and desire had its own etiquette. You can almost hear the rustle of skirts brushing stone, the quiet click of a jewelled shoe hurrying to meet its secret. Every torch set along the path seems to wink at you, as if complicit. And truly, the palace is a living thing, its very walls designed to both display and conceal. One historian once called Versailles a gilded stage where everyone performed their longing. You feel that tonight. Your heart stutters as a figure in a silver mask emerges from the shadows. He bows deeply to another man, a slender court musician whose hands are as elegant as any noble's. For an instant their fingers touch in a silent promise. No one will write this in the official memoirs, but you've seen it. The hidden desires that pulse beneath those towering periwigs, beneath the etiquette manuals and formal portraits. The court was as famous for its decadence as it was for its war strategies, and in these velvety hours after midnight, a king's affection could ignite or ruin entire families. The musician is playing a low, trembling note on his viola da gamba, filling the air with something sad and private. You catch the faintest glimmer of recognition in the nobleman's eyes, the look of someone who knows their future can be unmade by a single touch. It's almost funny, isn't it? How many empires have risen and fallen on the whims of men and women who couldn't resist the thrill of a hidden caress. Remember that, as you trail back down the corridor, your breath shallow and your palms a little clammy. A century from now, all this guilt and gossip will fade, but tonight you stand among the very first notes of a symphony of secrets, and somewhere, just out of sight, the Sun King reclines in his private chambers, considering who will join him in the next act. You slide your hand along the cool balustrade as you climb a narrow staircase in a draughty Tudor palace, your candle flame stuttering in the gloom. Somewhere behind you a tapestry sighs in the night breeze. You pause, half expecting to see a white face peering through the shadows, some old courtier still lingering here in spirit. But it's only you and the rustle of your own breath. Tonight you've slipped into the realm of Elizabeth I. She has a reputation for icy virginity, an untouchable splendour that makes poets sputter into their quills, but you know better. You've read her letters, the ones folded tight into creases as sharp as the ache in her ribcage. In those pages, you catch glimpses of a heart that couldn't be entirely satisfied by power alone. Your candle flickers over a stack of correspondence. A few of the letters bear Robert Dudley's seal, yes, but others are unsigned, their script softer, more tentative. The ink is a faded brown, the colour of a secret that's waited too long to be told. You touch the edge of a page and feel a warmth that has nothing to do with the flame. In one letter, Elizabeth writes of sleepless nights, of a longing that outlasts the candle. She never quite names the lady she's writing to, but her words bloom in the hush like a pressed rose. Your laughter is my only peace. Imagine it, Gloriana herself, the Virgin Queen, chewing her lip in the dark, waiting for a reply that might never come. You close your eyes and listen to the soft creak of floorboards overhead. Even here, in the hush of this archive, her longing feels alive. Outside, the Thames moves on as if none of it mattered. No tender glances over embroidery hoops, no stolen afternoons in rose gardens that smelled of crushed herbs and recklessness. A historian once claimed Elizabeth only flirted with women as a tactic to keep the men guessing, but you're not so sure. You can almost see her now, leaning close to a lady in waiting with a hush in her voice, asking if she might walk with her after Vespers. You can almost taste the bittersweet dread of knowing every whispered promise could end up an accusation. You trail your candle across a portrait, Elizabeth in all her jewelled armour. The painter meant to show her invincible, but there's something in her eyes, a glint of yearning she never managed to conceal completely. Maybe it was the loneliness of ruling alone, maybe it was the thrill of knowing her heart belonged in no single box. Outside, the moon slides behind a cloud, and you're left in a darkness that feels comforting, as if the whole palace conspired to keep her confidences. You tiptoe back through the gallery, half expecting to hear her voice drifting in the gloom. "Sweet Robin," she once said of Dudley. But what names did she whisper when the doors were locked, and the world's expectations melted away? You could spend years here, chasing the clues. Frayed ribbon bookmarks, secret codes, and the faint perfume of crushed lavender between pages. But you already sense the truth. Elizabeth's legend was woven of more than statecraft and steel. There was room, hidden in the crevices of her rule, for affection that refused the ordinary shapes. Your candle finally sputters out, leaving you in the soft dark, and you smile, because you know she would have approved of your curiosity. After all, what's a crown, if not a reason to be desired by everyone and to truly belong to no one at all? You stand just inside the threshold of a vast Stuart ballroom, the scent of mulled wine and lamp oil pressing close as the violins scratch out a tune no one will remember by dawn. Your pulse quickens when you see the prince, James VI of Scotland and the First of England, gliding between guests in a plum-coloured doublet, the corners of his mouth curved in a private amusement. It's nearly dawn, but the candles are still tall and the gossip is still fresh. You slip along the edge of the crowd, watching as courtiers lean in with flattery sweet as honey. But James's gaze keeps darting over their powdered wigs, scanning the faces behind them. He's searching for someone, and you suspect it isn't any of the wives or daughters on display. You pause near a marble pillar, pretending to study the painted ceiling, but really you're listening. The prince has a laugh that sounds like a low cough, and it echoes when he finds his favourite, George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham. The moment George appears, something electric shifts in the air. James's face softens, his shoulders dropping a fraction, as if he's been holding his breath all night. It's an open secret in this court that their bond goes beyond politics. They have matching jewels, matching riding boots, and letters full of longing that no royal archivist can erase. The king has called George "my sweet child and wife," though you suspect the historians would rather you pretend he was only speaking figuratively. You move along the polished floorboards where masked dancers swirl in satins and velvets, their steps practiced and hollow, But at the edge of it all, James and George stand close, not quite touching. The king's gloved fingers drift to the duke's sleeve, brushing it lightly. A jolt passes between them, small enough to go unnoticed by most, but you see it. There's a moment when George leans in, whispering something that makes the king tilt his head back and laugh. It's the sound of a man remembering he's more than a sovereign, he's flesh and longing. A court poet once compared their closeness to Achilles and Patroclus. You imagine that comparison was meant as flattery, but it was also a confession. Some stories of love and power refuse to be tamed into platonic shapes. You step behind a column as the two men slip into a side chamber, their voices hushed. No one dares follow, though a few curious onlookers pretend to admire the paintings on the wall. You, however, are content to stand here, feeling the thrill of having witnessed the hush before the door closed. Time stretches. A draft tickles the back of your neck as the music slows. The orchestra shifts to a softer melody, and you think of all the letters James will write in the coming years. Letters where he'll call George the only man I have loved. Letters so warm they'll survive centuries, even when every diplomat insists they were harmless courtesies. Eventually the door reopens and the king emerges with a flushed cheek and a smile that makes you look away, as if you've seen something holy. A historian will later write that James's affection for men was an embarrassing episode. But you know better. You've stood here. You've seen how desire can slip past titles and become the only truth worth risking a throne for. You trail after them as they rejoin the crowd. Dawn is beginning to pale the windows, and everyone will soon pretend none of this happened. But you'll remember the way George brushed a stray hair off the king's forehead, unafraid of who was watching. A kingdom can survive war and famine and intrigue, but it cannot always contain the hidden soirees of a monarch's heart. You slip past a marble bust of Gustavus Adolphus and into the antechamber where Christina of Sweden once spread her maps and letters across an oak table, the scent of ink and old vellum saturating the air. Even in her youth she was restless, more interested in philosophy and swordplay than the conventions her counsellors whispered she should uphold. Tonight, though, you find her not in the council chamber but in the hush of her library, her silhouette outlined by firelight. Her boots are kicked off under the desk, a dagger tucked beside her papers, as if she's prepared for either scholarship or skirmish, and seated across from her, a woman with a scholar's posture and a poet's eyes. You've heard the stories, that Christina was crowned king, not queen, to underscore her singular nature, that she was rumoured to slip into men's clothing and vanish into the Stockholm streets when court life chafed, and that she loved, in her own fierce way, with no patience for permission. The logs in the hearth snap as she pushes aside a volume of Cicero to better study the woman before her, Ebba Spara. You've read their letters, the ones that pass from duty into something more tender. Christina called her Belle, her beauty, her comfort. Tonight you sense the same devotion hovering in the lamplight. You draw closer, careful not to disturb the moment. Christina reaches out and tucks a loose curl behind Ebba's ear, her thumb lingering just longer than a queen's decorum would allow. The hush feels electric, charged with all the words that will never find their way into official accounts. "Remember," she murmurs. Your heart thuds as you lean in. "No matter what the council demands of me, this will always be ours." The phrase dissolves into the crackling of the fire, but it's enough to make you shiver. You think of the painting that will one day hang in Gripsholm Castle, Christina posed in armour with eyes as unflinching as a falcon's. A queen who refused to marry, a monarch who abdicated her throne rather than be yoked to a life she could not bear. But here, in the soft lamp glow, she isn't a figurehead or a rebel. She's simply a woman pressing her palm to another's cheek, searching for a moment of truth in a world built on performance. You drift along the bookshelves, their spines whispering Latin maxims and treatises on power. But tonight, Christina doesn't care about governance. She doesn't care that Rome waits to receive her as a convert, or that Europe will be scandalized by her choices. She cares only that Ebba is here, that the hush between them is deep enough to drown out every other voice. Outside, snow begins to fall in the courtyard, dusting the windows in a soft white glaze. Christina stands to stir the embers, her hair tumbling loose around her shoulders. For once she looks her age, young, defiant, and a little weary. Ebba rises too, their hands brushing as if by accident. You wonder how many nights ended this way, with Christina setting aside her armour for a softer conquest, and how many mornings came with regret or relief, or simply the knowledge that she would never belong entirely to any nation or any single heart. A historian once called Christina a monarch out of time, too radical to be contained by her centuries' imagination. You can see why. Even in this quiet chamber she blurs the lines of gender, of duty, of love itself. The fire sputters low, and you feel the cold seeping back into the stone floor. But your own pulse is warm, quickened by the knowledge that some truths persist, whether or not the world dares to speak them aloud. As Christina extinguishes the candle, you slip from the library, carrying her secret with you. Tomorrow she will don her crown and her armour again. But tonight, she has laid them both aside for the only throne that ever mattered, the quiet certainty of a lover's gaze. You drift beneath a marble arch into the Medici gardens, where the air is thick with orange blossoms and the last cicadas of the evening. The Florentine dusk has a way of making everything look like a painting. Fountains blurred in lavender twilight, statues frozen mid-revel, and lovers tracing invisible patterns through the hedges. Your shoes crunch on gravel as you slip past a row of cypress trees. Ahead, a duke leans against a sundial, his velvet cloak pooling around jewel-bright slippers. Cosimo de' Medici, heir, patron, schemer, and tonight, a man tangled in longing he dares not parade through the grand halls. He holds a slim folio, parchment corners fluttering in the breeze. You catch a glimpse of the script, a poem too delicate to be mere flattery. Every line spills affection for its unnamed subject, verses that could topple reputations if read aloud in the wrong salon. And Cosimo is not alone. Beside him, a young poet reclines on a stone bench, an ink-stained thumb tapping the marble to some private rhythm. You stay hidden, your breath shallow. From this vantage you see how their bodies angle toward each other like compass needles drawn by an unspoken magnetism. Every few sentences the poet glances up, as if searching for permission. Cosimo answers with a smile so tender it doesn't belong to a duke. A rustle of skirts interrupts them, and you nearly trip over a laurel bough as a woman emerges. Cosimo's bride draped in ivory silk. She moves gracefully, a faint question in her eyes as she greets them. And here is the curious thing. She does not look angry. She settles on Cosimo's other side, her hand resting on his sleeve. The three of them sit together, and for a moment, you think the world might be simpler than anyone admits. A garden where affections tangle without shame, where poems are written for more than one recipient. Cosimo reads a line aloud, something about the moon being too pale to rival the warmth of a beloved skin. The bride laughs, low and fond, and the poet flushes. You can see it clearly. All of them know, all of them have agreed on this unorthodox peace. It isn't the arrangement the Vatican would endorse, but Florence has never cared much for Rome's disapproval. This is a city that thrives on appetite, art, wealth, love. Why not all at once? A century later, historians will argue whether Cosimo's heart leaned more toward men or women. You suspect the truth was simpler. He loved who he loved, and refused to trim those feelings to fit a single label. A fountain splashes nearby, its marble satyrs frozen mid-leer. You can't help smiling. Even the statues look conspiratorial, as if winking at your discovery. The bride rises first, trailing her hand across the poet's shoulder, a gesture so soft it breaks your heart a little. She doesn't need a confession. She already knows her place in this tangled braid of affections. She accepts it, perhaps even cherishes it. Cosimo lingers with the poet another moment, murmuring something you can't quite hear. His expression is equal parts melancholy and relief. When he finally stands, he gathers the folio against his chest as if it were a talisman. You remain among the cypress trees, letting them pass. No one sees you, just another shadow in a garden built to cradle secrets. Later, when you slip back toward the villa, you pause at the sundial. Your finger traces the hour marked midnight. You imagine how many declarations have been whispered here, how many lovers, royal and otherwise, have decided that some kinds of devotion are worth the risk. And as the last fireflies drift upward, you feel it yourself, the hush of a world where love refuses to be reduced to a single name. You slip through a hidden door behind the Hall of Mirrors, heart thrumming at the thought of what it must have been like to serve the Sun King, Louis XIV, the monarch who made even scandal look magnificent. By day, he was the centre of the universe, the embodiment of France's might. But by night, when the candles had guttered to blue nubs, he was simply a man with a heart so vast it could not be confined to a single person or gender. Tonight, you creep behind a gilded screen, the fretwork cool against your cheek. From here, you can see the royal dressing chamber, more like a stage set, with its tall mirrors and canopied couch. In the reflection, Louis sits in a state of half undress, his embroidered waistcoat unbuttoned, his hair falling loose around his shoulders. At his side stands Philippe, his younger brother, Monsieur, as the court called him. Philippe is slimmer, more delicate in his gestures, his painted lips tilted in a half smile that says he knows exactly what people say about them, and he doesn't care. The two men talk in low voices, their words blurred by the hush of midnight. Occasionally Louis reaches up to touch Philippe's sleeve, or to tuck a lock of hair behind his ear. To the casual observer, it might look like any brotherly affection. But you've read the letters, the diaries that call Philippe my secret mirror. You've heard the rumours that when the king tired of the formal ballet of his many mistresses, he slipped away to spend hours with the only person who never lied to him. One courtier, whose name never made it into official records, claimed that Louis and Philippe had a love both tender and ruinous. You can see why. As Philippe laughs softly, Louis's entire face transforms, all the stern grandeur melting into something startlingly vulnerable. You trail your finger along the gilt panel, feeling the sticky heat of candle drips. You wonder if the king ever felt trapped in the performance of kingship, if the only time he truly belonged to himself was in these quiet exchanges reflected in his brother's eyes. The Sun King had mistresses enough to fill a directory, but he also had a habit of blurring the lines between friendship and something deeper, between statecraft and desire. Some nights he and Philippe would disappear into the mirror-walled salon, locking the doors behind them, and when they emerged, rumour had it, they glowed with a serenity no coronation could provide. A historian once wrote that Louis's greatest love was his own reflection, but maybe that was just the safest way to say he found comfort in someone who understood every jagged facet of his heart, someone whose presence was as familiar as his own face. From your hiding place you watch as Philippe rises to pour them both a little Spanish wine. They stand close, heads bent together in a hush that feels too private for any chronicler's quill. And just for a moment you see it, a king shedding his splendour, a brother offering absolution. The mirrors multiply the image, Louis and Philippe repeated to infinity, as if the palace itself wanted to preserve this secret, to scatter it so no one could pin it down. Outside, a breeze lifts the tapestries, bringing with it the scent of lavender from the gardens. You close your eyes, letting that softness fill your lungs. In a few hours, Louis will don his mantle and become the sun again, blinding in his certainty. But for now, he's simply a man who longs to be known, completely and without judgment. You slip back through the hidden door, heart steady with the knowledge that even the most dazzling ruler carried a private hunger, one that could never be satisfied by the applause of 1,000 courtiers. And as you tiptoe down the shadowed corridor, you know you've glimpsed the truest reflection of power, a man unmasked. You drift into the amber glow of a Russian palace, the hush of midnight so deep it feels alive. Here in St. Petersburg, the halls are cavernous enough to swallow any rumour, unless it concerns Catherine the Great. Tonight you trail your hand along the damask wallpaper, listening for footfalls that never come. The Empress has retired to her private audience chamber, a space lined with carved bookcases and enormous canvases of past tsars glowering down in judgment. But Catherine never cared much for judgment. She sits near the hearth, her silver dressing gown pulled around her ankles, a folio of state papers balanced on one knee. But her gaze is not on the manifestos or reports. It's on the woman kneeling at her feet, her hand resting lightly on Catherine's calf as if to steady them both. You've read the accounts that call Catherine insatiable, always searching for new lovers to parade at court. But here, in the hush of lamplight, you see something simpler, an empress clinging to the only tenderness that wasn't a performance. The woman is Alexandra, a lady-in-waiting whose name rarely makes it into the annals, a shadow in the official records, but a sun in Catherine's private sky. Tonight, Alexandra reads from a slim volume of poetry, her voice so low you have to strain to catch each syllable. "Beloved," she murmurs, and you feel your pulse hitch. "You are the shore against which I break." Catherine smiles, just a flicker of soft surrender. For all her conquests, territorial, political and personal, she has never been able to conquer the ache that wakes her in the small hours, the ache to be loved without expectation. You watch as Alexandra sets the book aside and lifts Catherine's hand to her lips. The gesture is both deferential and fearless, a delicate rebellion against the constraints of the court. You imagine how scandalised the ministers would be if they barged in right now, but in this hush, none of that matters. A historian once wrote that Catherine's appetites were evidence of a woman too dangerous to be contained. You suspect they were simply evidence of a woman determined to taste every corner of life, even the corners that polite society refused to acknowledge. A log pops in the fire, showering sparks onto the hearth. Catherine starts, then laughs, a sound so unguarded it feels almost improper. She leans forward, pressing her forehead to Alexandra's, the two of them breathing in unison. You take a step closer, though you know you shouldn't. In the ember's glow, you see that Catherine's eyes are wet, not with sorrow, but with the terrible, relieving recognition that she doesn't have to be the Empress for a few stolen minutes. She can just be a woman. Alexandra murmurs something that makes Catherine's shoulders soften. You can't hear the words, but you don't need to. You can see their meaning etched into the hush. You are loved. You are known. You are enough. For a moment you imagine what it must feel like to carry an empire on your back, and then to lay it down in a single touch. Catherine draws back and wipes her cheek, a tiny laugh escaping her. "Tomorrow," she says, her voice reasserting its imperial command, "we will deal with the Turkish ambassador." Alexandra only nods as if to say tomorrow can wait, tonight is ours. You slip back through the doorway as Catherine lifts the folio again, her hand still resting atop Alexandra's. The firelight dances across their joined fingers, a flickering testament to the truth no manifesto can erase. Outside, the snow drifts in soft curtains over the courtyard. You feel it in your chest, the knowledge that the most powerful woman in Europe was also the most quietly hungry for love in all its ungovernable forms. And as you step into the corridor, you exhale, certain that you have seen something real, something no empire could smother, into a hush so profound it feels like the air has been folded in half. The Mughal harem is nothing like the lurid European imaginings, no brass trays piled with fruit, no dancers in gauze. Instead, the space breathes with a quiet, disciplined grace. Tonight you stand beneath a high lattice window, your breath clouding in the lantern glow. Silk cushions are scattered across the floor, embroidered with emerald threads that glimmer when the flame leans close. And there, reclining among them, is Emperor Jahangir, his eyes half closed, his voice low as he listens to the woman seated beside him. Her name is Mehrunisa, Nur Jahan, the light of the world. History will remember her as a consort, a strategist, a queen who signed imperial decrees. But tonight, you glimpse the side that the chronicles only whisper about. Her palm rests on the emperor's bare forearm, her thumb sweeping tiny circles. They aren't alone. Another figure sits cross-legged near Jahangir's knee, a slender court musician, his sitar balanced across his lap. The music is soft as a confession, each note blurring the line between prayer and seduction. You watch as the emperor's gaze drifts from Mehrunisa to the musician and back again, a gentle calculation in his expression. There are rumours he has shared more than songs with this man, rumours carried by eunuchs and scribes who know how quickly a monarch's affection can become treason if named aloud. Yet here, in the hush, no one is afraid. The emperor lifts his hand, beckoning the musician closer. A thin smile curls his lips, one part affection, one part curiosity. As the music builds, you feel the room holding its breath. A historian once called Jahangir a ruler whose heart was as mercurial as the monsoon. You can see why. Even in love, he refused to choose a single vessel for his longing. Why should he, when the empire itself was an endless garden of possibilities? The musician shifts closer, the sitar's neck brushing the emperor's shoulder. The melody rises, a spiral of yearning so vivid it seems to braid the three of them together. You catch a glimpse of Mehrunisa's face. No jealousy, only a solemn understanding. When you live at the centre of an empire, you learn that love doesn't always wear the shapes you expect. A breeze flutters the embroidered draperies, carrying the scent of sandalwood and rose oil. You close your eyes, letting the music sink into your chest. For a moment, you feel as if you've fallen into the spaces between identities, where devotion exists free of titles. Jahangir lifts a cup of opium-laced wine, taking a slow sip before offering it first to Mehrunisa, then to the musician. They both drink, and in that small ritual you see a kind of pact. No explanations, no apologies. It's almost funny, you think. How many imperial decrees were signed by this same hand, the one that now lingers in a lover's hair? The music falters. The musician's fingers tremble, as if he's aware the song will be over too soon. Jahangir leans forward, whispering something you can't hear. But the hush that follows makes your chest ache. You step back into the shadows as the emperor lowers his head to Mehrunisa's lap, his hand still entwined with the musician's. It is a tableau you'll carry with you, proof that even in the strictest court, love will carve out its hidden corners. Outside, dawn teases the latticework with pale light. Soon the emperor will rise to greet his ministers, and this hush will scatter like jasmine petals. But tonight, you have seen the truth beneath the silks, the heart of an empire beating in three bodies at once. You slip away, careful not to disturb their fragile peace. Some stories deserve to stay tucked in the velvet folds of night. You step across the threshold of a Versailles chamber so opulent it feels like a dream you might not wake from. Brocade drapes, gilt cornices, and crystal chandeliers, an avalanche of luxury that somehow can't cover the more delicate truths hiding in plain sight. Tonight, you find yourself standing near the writing desk where Marie Antoinette once scribbled notes to her dearest confidants. The queen the world remembers is a confection of gossip and rumour, petulant, frivolous, doomed. But the real Marie had dimensions that never fit into a single pamphlet's caricature. A folded journal lies on the desk, its edges softened by too many nights of careful reading. You lift the cover, half afraid you'll be caught by a ghostly footman. Inside, her tidy hand spills across the page, every loop and flourish betraying a secret hope. The passage that stops you cold reads simply, "It is not the king's approval that calms me. It is yours." The recipient's name has been scratched out, perhaps by Marie herself, in a moment of dread or regret. but you can almost feel the warmth of the missing word hovering between the lines. Some historians argue she was only writing to Axel von Fersen, her most famous confidant. But you've read further, and you suspect the story isn't quite so tidy. There were women at court, ladies who braided her hair in the mornings, who watched her eyes for any sign of unhappiness. Women who knew that a single touch could say everything words could not. You trace a finger down the margin, feeling the ache that survived even the revolution's fury. It's not hard to imagine Marie perched on this very stool, whispering confessions into the darkness. "Stay with me," she might have breathed, her voice shaking as the palace around her rattled with unrest. And perhaps, in the hush of that moment, her confidant pressed a kiss to her temple, a promise no guillotine could erase. Outside, the night hums with the restless sleep of 1,000 courtiers. But here, the air feels tender. A pair of gloves lies discarded near the hearth, soft kid leather that still holds the shape of the hands that wore them. You close your eyes and imagine the queen shedding her rolls like a gown. No longer a monarch, no longer an icon of decadence. Just a woman whose heart refused to align with polite expectations. A clock strikes 2, its chime swallowed by the brocade. You step to the window, watching the garden stretch into the darkness. Somewhere beyond the trees, peasants are awake, planning revolution. But in this chamber, the only revolution is the quiet rebellion of a love that defied definition. A breeze sneaks through the shutter, fluttering the journal's pages. For a moment you see the faintest impression of another hand, slender, feminine, pressed into the margin, a print left behind in an act of solidarity that no one ever thought to erase. You think of all the times Marie must have braced herself for the day's scrutiny, knowing that somewhere in the shadows waited the person who made her feel briefly, blessedly safe. When you finally close the journal, you feel the same hush you've encountered in so many palaces, the space where power and desire slip free of their cages. You suspect this is the truest version of her story. Not the queen with diamond necklaces and cake, but the woman who reached for the only solace she trusted. You slip back into the corridor, the hush wrapping around your shoulders like a cloak. You can almost hear her voice trailing after you, a whisper that insists some secrets are worth keeping. And as you step into the dark, you feel the weight of all the unwritten confessions the world never dared to name. You step into a campaign tent lit by a single oil lamp, its thin flame throwing shadows that leap across the canvas like restless spirits. Outside, the French army sleeps in ragged ranks beneath the stars, but inside, Napoleon Bonaparte sits hunched over a cluttered table, his famous uniform jacket slung carelessly across a chair. Tonight he looks less like an emperor and more like a man, his hair mussed, his gaze fixed on a letter creased from too many readings. You edge closer, careful not to jostle the crates of dispatches, and catch sight of a familiar name at the bottom of the page. It isn't Josephine's. The script is delicate, the flourishes unmistakably foreign. The letter is from Charles Tristan, Comte de Montauban, ostensibly a loyal aide-de-camp, but in the hush of these war-weary nights, something closer. The historians who catalogued Napoleon's passions always made room for Josephine, for Maria Walewska. But Charles was the quiet constant, the friend who stayed when all others drifted away. The paper trembles in Napoleon's hand as he reads the closing line again. Je suis à vous, I am yours. You feel your breath catch. For all the campaigns and coronations, perhaps this was the real conquest, the certainty that someone could love him without flinching at the cost. He folds the letter, pressing it to his lips with a quick, private reverence. Then he lifts his head and glances toward the tent flap. You follow his gaze and see Montauban himself standing there, his silhouette framed by the lamplight. For a moment, neither man moves. The only sound is the restless sigh of the wind rattling the tent ropes. When Montauban steps inside, Napoleon doesn't bark orders or pretend to read reports. He simply holds out his hand as if to say, "It's all too much without you." and Montholon, his boots dusty from the night watch, takes it without hesitation. You retreat a pace to give them privacy you'll never really grant. Montholon lowers himself onto the edge of the table, one knee brushing Napoleon's thigh, their hands still joined in the space between campaign maps. A historian once argued that all of Napoleon's relationships were transactional, but you can see that this is something quieter, an affection that doesn't need the fanfare of an empire to make it real. Montholon says something too low to catch, and Napoleon laughs, a brief, tired sound. You recognise it instantly, that note of relief that only comes when someone has laid down every mask. Your gaze drifts to the tent walls, where shadows flicker in rhythm with the wind. It's almost funny. 1,000 soldiers would die for this man, yet it takes only one confidant to remind him that he is human. They sit in companionable silence, Montholon's thumb tracing circles over Napoleon's knuckles. You wonder if this is how it always is for the powerful, trapped in a blaze of glory, yet longing for a single quiet corner where the world can't intrude. Outside, the campfires burn low and a lone horse snorts in the darkness. Here in the lamplight, two men share an intimacy that will never quite find its way into official histories. Perhaps that's for the best. Some truths are too delicate for the blunt instruments of record-keeping. After a time, Montholon stands, his hand lingering on Napoleon's shoulder. You watch the Emperor lean into that touch as if drawing strength he cannot name. He will ride out at dawn and redraw Europe with his cannons, but tonight he is only a man clinging to the one person who has never asked him to be more than himself. You slip away before they can see you watching, your own pulse steady with the knowledge that even the conqueror of nations could not conquer his own hidden tenderness. And as you vanish into the hush, you feel that you have seen the rarest thing of all, a heart undefeated by ambition. You step lightly over the threshold of Osborne House, where the chill of the English Channel seeps into the flagstones and the air smells of rosewater and beeswax. The corridors here are lined with portraits, Victoria in every phase of her astonishing life, the solemn child queen, the adored young bride, the weary widow. But tonight, you walk past those oil paintings with barely a glance. Because you know there was another story, one that refused to be painted in polite oils or set down in the official diaries, a story that began in the hush of correspondence and bloomed in the ache of a grief that would not be comforted by any man. You pause beside a small mahogany desk, the candle flickering over stacks of papers bound in green ribbon. It looks innocuous enough, just another relic of monarchy. But when you slip the top sheaf free and tilt it toward the light, your heart tightens. The writing is small, neat, precise. Victoria's hand, unmistakable, and the lines themselves are unmistakable too if you know where to look. You are the only one who understands the shadows. The letter is unsigned. The historians who sifted through these archives labelled it miscellaneous, though you suspect they knew better. You breathe in, steadying yourself for what you'll read next. Each sentence vibrates with that particular hush you have come to recognise, the language of an affection too complex for any single name. Tonight I am thinking of you, and how you looked in the rain, your hair so black it seemed a curtain against the world. Victoria never mentions the recipient outright. Perhaps she thought if she left the name off, it would protect them both. But you know the stories of the woman she called my dearest in private notes, the lady who rose through the ranks of her household, not by birth but by the quiet certainty of her devotion. You slip the letter back into the stack, heart thudding. Outside, the wind rattles the ivy against the window panes. You imagine Victoria sitting here on countless evenings, pressing her pen to the page, trying to siphon her grief into something she could bear. Most people think of her as the grieving widow of Albert, an image so fixed it has all but hardened into myth. But in the months and years after his death, it was this other presence that eased her back into life, the confidant who helped her breathe again. You step farther into the sitting room, your footfalls muffled by the thick Persian carpet. On a side table rests a miniature portrait in a velvet case. The clasp is tarnished with age, but when you ease it open, you catch your breath. A woman's face, dark hair parted simply, gaze steady and calm. She looks nothing like the society beauties who fluttered around the Queen. Perhaps that was part of the appeal. No pretense, no performance. Only the quiet reassurance of someone who saw the woman behind the monarch. A historian once tried to dismiss their bond as excessive dependence. You smile at that. How convenient to label any affection that does not fit a comfortable script as weakness. But you've read the words Victoria never intended for public view, and you've seen the truth they carry. Without you, the darkness would swallow me. The candle gutters, a sudden draught swirling through the chamber. You press the miniature case shut, the echo of that confession still tingling in your chest. It is easy to imagine Victoria here, after another long day of ceremony, sinking into the chair by the window, reading a fresh letter that smelled faintly of lavender. To the outside world she remained the embodiment of British virtue and reserve, but here, in the hush of evening, she allowed herself to be simply a woman in mourning, leaning on the only person who dared to stand close. You walk to the window, palms braced against the cold glass. The gardens stretch down to the sea, silvered by moonlight. You imagine how often she must have stood here, watching the waves churn against the breakwater, wondering if the ache in her chest would ever quiet. Perhaps it never did. Perhaps it simply softened, tempered by the knowledge that she was not alone in her sorrow. You step back into the room. A single sheet has slipped to the floor and you stoop to retrieve it. This one is different, later written in a shakier hand. I am so tired, but thinking of you makes the darkness gentle. You press your lips together, unwilling to let the ache inside you bloom too fully. Because there is a peculiar cruelty in the way history insists on flattening women's stories, trimming the inconvenient parts. Victoria was many things: empress, matriarch, legend. But here, she was simply someone who had survived too much, and who clung to the one person who knew the full weight of her heart. You set the paper gently back on the desk and turn toward the door. Your steps are careful, reverent. Because in this room, you have seen the most fragile truth of all, that the need to be known can outlast any crown. As you cross the threshold, the candle behind you finally flickers out. But you don't mind the dark. You carry the glow with you, pressed like a secret against your ribs. You find yourself in a labyrinthine palace in Berlin, its high ceilings echoing with the clipped footsteps of servants and the distant toll of church bells. Tonight the corridors are cold, lined with Prussian blue tapestries, and the scent of wood smoke and saddle leather lingers in the air. This is the home of Wilhelm II, the last German Kaiser. The world remembers him for his sharp uniform, his withered left arm, and the catastrophes that shadowed his reign. But you tonight slip past the marble busts of Frederick and Bismarck, ignoring the portraits of mustachioed generals, to follow the trail of letters Wilhelm hid from the world. You step into his private study, a sanctuary crammed with model ships, maps, and odd curiosities from every corner of his fractious empire. On the wall hangs a photograph, Wilhelm in riding boots, standing beside a slender, handsome officer. The officer's face is serious, but there's a private warmth in the tilt of Wilhelm's shoulders, as if the camera caught him between a sigh and a laugh. The Emperor's desk is a chaos of papers. You sift through telegrams, sketches of dreadnoughts, and, tucked between them, notes addressed simply to L. You read quietly, as if not to disturb the waxen silence of the room. You alone know the ache in my heart, one note reads, the pen strokes tense and upright. I am so tired of masks, so weary of being only a symbol. The L in question is Lieutenant Kuhne von Moltke, a name the official histories only half whisper. You picture their friendship, forged in the rigid routines of court and softened in long carriage rides across the Tiergarten. They spoke in clipped phrases, traded books in French and English, and when the doors were locked, sat side by side in a hush that outlasted the hours. You move closer to the fireplace, its embers throwing faint shadows. There are rumours, of course, that Wilhelm's friendships with his officers were more than platonic. The English papers called him too sentimental by half. Some Prussian ministers worried aloud about the emperor's over-fondness for the company of handsome men. But what you see here is simpler. In a world where loyalty was rare, Wilhelm's affections were a quiet rebellion. You find a photograph tucked into a book of poems. Two men, Wilhelm and Kuno, on horseback in the Brandenburg woods. Wilhelm's hand hovers just behind Kuno's back, a gesture too casual for courtly display, but intimate if you know how to look. A historian once dismissed these relationships as adolescent passions, the inevitable consequence of boys raised together in military academies. But the letters you find tell another story. "You see me when I am not the Kaiser," he writes. "With you, I am just Wilhelm." You imagine them, walking beneath the lindens in spring, speaking softly of music and philosophy. Kuno quoting Goethe, Wilhelm letting the words roll over him like rain. At some point, Kuno reaches for Wilhelm's hand, a risk that could ruin them both if anyone saw. But tonight, in your mind's eye, no one is watching. You drift through the study, picking up the bits and pieces of a life spent behind masks. A dog-eared copy of Heine's poetry, a pocket watch with a faded photograph tucked inside the case. The photograph is so small you have to squint, but it is unmistakably Kuno, looking directly into the lens, eyes bright, as if he's in on some shared joke. In a world that demanded stoicism, Wilhelm's yearning for genuine affection was almost revolutionary. It didn't fit into the martial myth of Prussia. It was neither chivalric nor courtly. It was real, vulnerable and tender. You settle into a leather armchair and close your eyes, letting the fire's warmth seep into your bones. For a moment you can almost hear their voices, the low murmur of men who do not need to fill every silence with words. Wilhelm asks, "Will you stay tonight?" Kuno's answer is a smile, a squeeze of the hand. You open your eyes to the crackle of the fire. There's a letter you almost missed slipped behind the clock. The paper is thin and trembling, the handwriting rushed. "The world is changing, Kuno. Soon there will be only memory. When I am gone, remember me not as your emperor, but as the man who loved you in the hush between wars." A gust rattles the window panes. You rise and look out over the city. Berlin spread beneath a violet sky, the gaslights flickering along Unter den Linden. For all his power, Wilhelm was haunted by the knowledge that the world was slipping away from him. He clung to Kuno not only for comfort, but for a sense of self that no throne could give. In the corner of the study you find another relic, a glass paperweight, inside which floats a pressed blue flower. Forget me not. You remember reading that Wilhelm used to give these to those he loved, a secret language amid all the pomp and steel. It's almost funny, an empire built on iron, but a heart that could be undone by a single wildflower. The fire burns low. You hear the clock strike midnight, and with it the distant sound of horses' hooves on the cobblestones outside. The city never truly sleeps, but you, in this quiet chamber, can finally rest. As you stand to leave, your gaze lingers on the photograph of the two men, forever young, forever just out of reach of history's cold grasp. You turn out the lamp, leaving the study in darkness, but carrying the soft glow of their secret out into the long Prussian night. But your journey tonight isn't finished. You slip back into the corridor and let your footsteps guide you deeper into Wilhelm's tangled world. Down the long marble-floored hallway, you catch snatches of music. A piano played softly, a woman's laughter. You drift past ballrooms filled with diplomats and officers, but you're not looking for statecraft or power. You're following the thread of human longing, pulled ever forward by the knowledge that history is written in more than treaties and wars. You remember a story half hidden in the archives about another of Wilhelm's friendships, this one with an English nobleman. The two exchanged letters for years, their affection coded but unmistakable to those willing to read between the lines. "The heart knows no borders," one letter reads, "only the timidity of the tongue." You imagine the two men meeting at a diplomatic reception, each careful not to betray too much in public. But later, perhaps in the hush of a carriage ride or a quiet drawing room, they could lower their masks and speak the simple truths they carried. As the night deepens, you wander outside into the palace gardens. The moon is a silver coin hung above the lime trees. Here the air smells of crushed grass and summer rain. You picture Wilhelm walking here with Kuno, laughing softly, free for a moment from the burdens of rule. You sit on a marble bench, the cool stone grounding you. In the hush, you let yourself feel the ache and the beauty of these hidden affections, the ones that shaped the fate of empires, but left behind only whispers and pressed flowers. A single bat flits overhead, chasing moths through the shadows. In the far distance you hear the echo of church bells tolling for a world on the cusp of change. Back inside, the palace is still. You return to the study, picking up the book of poems and opening it at random. The words leap out at you. "Where I am weak, you are my strength. Where I am silent, you are my voice." You close the book, letting the quiet seep into your soul. For all the uniforms and declarations, for all the sabres and medals, what endures are the moments when two people found, in each other, the courage to be known. The fire has burned itself out. The embers pulse like tiny sleeping hearts. You slip from the room, not looking back, carrying with you the most precious thing of all, the knowledge that even in the coldest courts, the warmest secrets survived. You drift toward the gilded salons of late Victorian London, where the lamps burn low and the wallpaper seems to shimmer with secrets. Here, in the hush before dawn, you find Edward VII, not yet king, but still the restless Prince of Wales, his laughter echoing down corridors thick with the scent of tobacco and expensive perfume. Edward has a reputation. The world remembers him as the playboy prince, a man who never met a pleasure he didn't try to master. But tonight, you move past the legend to the quieter corners, the card table after midnight, the library with its half-finished brandy, the alcove behind the velvet curtains, where the truth grows more complex, and the air carries the pulse of something softer. You catch a glimpse of him, Bertie to his friends, leaning close to a man whose name will never appear in the royal diaries. Their conversation is easy, the language of long trust. The man, a young diplomat with thoughtful eyes and a crooked smile, listens as Edward grumbles about politics, about the latest family squabble, about the wearying weight of expectation. Edward's hand lingers on the diplomat's sleeve a little too long. It is a gesture that, in this particular salon, among these particular friends, draws only knowing smiles. Not outrage, not alarm. There's a sense that everyone in the room understands the invisible lines they've agreed not to cross, and the ones they cross all the time. A few feet away, a famous actress raises an eyebrow and pours herself another glass of wine. She catches your eye and winks as if to say, "Nothing to see here, dear. Move along." You realise she too is part of the intricate web that holds this circle together. A web spun from shared secrets, midnight laughter, and a kind of love that cannot be declared in the morning's harsh light. Edward leans back, his laughter suddenly softer, his shoulders relaxing in a way that surprises you. He and the diplomat drift into a discussion of poetry, Tennyson and Swinburne, and a little Baudelaire for spice. The prince quotes a line that makes the diplomat blush, and for a moment they are simply two men drawn together by words, by wit, by the comfort of each other's presence. It would be easy to dismiss all this as idle flirtation, a game played by the bored and the powerful. But you notice the gentleness with which Edward listens, the care he takes not to interrupt. For a man famous for his appetites, he is curiously attentive, almost reverent. A clock strikes 3. The last of the guests begin to slip away. shoes in hand and cheeks flushed from drink. Edward stands, clapping the diplomat on the back, and for a fleeting moment their hands entwine, not as a prince and a subject, but as equals. You follow as they stroll into the garden, the fog curling around their legs. They speak in low voices, sharing confidences that will never be recorded in any royal archive. There is a seriousness to Edward's expression now, a rawness that speaks of the burdens he cannot share with his mother, the Queen, nor with any of his siblings. The diplomat listens, his face open, his silence patient. He reaches out briefly to squeeze Edward's hand. "You're not alone," he says. The prince exhales and you sense he believes it, if only for tonight. You step back, leaving them in the silver light, and remember all the history books that describe Edward as a man lost to pleasure. What they forget is that pleasure too can be a form of longing, a way of seeking what is withheld, what cannot be named. Sometimes it is only in the gentlest moments of intimacy, the ones that pass like ships in the fog, that a heart finds rest. As the dawn creeps over London, you slip from the garden carrying with you the memory of two men whose midnight conversation might have changed nothing, and yet, quietly, stubbornly, changed everything. You wake as if from a long misty dream, and find yourself transported to the heart of Imperial Vienna, where the city is washed in the pale gold of afternoon, its streets swirling with carriages and the distant peal of church bells. But inside the Hofburg Palace all is hush and shadow. The air is heavy with lavender and a faint trace of wood smoke, seeping under carved doors and through silk hangings, settling most densely in the private suite of Empress Elizabeth. Cece to those who dared speak her name with tenderness. Tonight, you drift down corridors lined with portraits of emperors and generals, their eyes stern and their beards formidable, as if to warn you that secrets are not welcome here. But secrets have always found their way to Cece, and you, with your feet muffled by Turkish carpets and your breath barely stirring the air, are here to gather them. The candles gutter in their sconces, painting soft halos against the damask. The palace is sleeping or pretending to as you slip into the Empress's inner sanctum. Cece is not in her official apartments, where she's supposed to receive dignitaries and endure the ceaseless grind of ceremonial life. Instead, she's in a tiny writing room near the gardens, its windows thrown wide to the summer night, the curtains shivering in a secretive breeze. You see her at her desk, back ramrod straight, hair unbound and falling like a midnight river over her white dressing gown. She's beautiful, of course, scandalously so, but also restless, raw, alive in a way portraits cannot capture. On the desk before her are the tools of her escape: sheets of thick paper, a silver-tipped pen, and a stack of half-written letters, bound with a faded ribbon. You approach silently, not daring to disturb her, and read over her shoulder. The first words you see are not addressed to Franz Joseph, her emperor husband, but to a name only hinted at in the curve of her handwriting: Ida, or perhaps Irma, one of the many women who passed through her life, leaving ripples that would last far beyond a single court season. Cece's letters are confessions, written not for posterity but for the midnight hour, for that shivering moment when loneliness feels like the only certainty. "My dearest," she writes, "tonight the world presses too close. Only your words reach me soft as a memory." She writes of garden walks, of secret glances traded behind fans, of hands brushing in the shadows of carriage interiors, far from the emperor's watchful gaze. You sense the ache in every line, an ache not just for romantic fulfillment, but for understanding, for a soul who might see the bruises hidden beneath her silks. Cece has always been an outsider in Vienna, a Bavarian princess never quite embraced by the Habsburg machine. Her letters, you realize, are lifelines thrown to those who understand her isolation, her wildness, her hunger for freedom. You wander to the window and look out over the moonlit gardens. Somewhere beyond the hedges the Emperor's guards are pacing, their boots scuffing the gravel. But inside, Cece is alone, except for the echo of her confidants, women whose affection came without judgment or demand. A historian once called Cece the loneliest woman in Europe. But as you read, you see a different kind of strength. She writes, "In your arms, I am not a prisoner of my name. I am only Elizabeth, and I belong to myself." It's a radical claim whispered in the dark, one her mother-in-law, the iron-fisted Archduchess Sophie, would have condemned as dangerous nonsense. But Cece was never afraid of danger. She courted it, coaxed it, made it her companion in the lonely hours. You find another letter, its paper pressed with a dried violet. This one is more playful. "Irma, do you remember Lake Garda? The wind tangled our hair, and you dared me to swim across to the far shore. I thought I would freeze, but your laughter warmed me the whole way. When we returned, we looked like nothing more than damp, breathless girls. I wished we could stay in that wildness forever." The letter ends with a flourish, a heart, hastily drawn, quickly crossed out as if Cece regretted the slip. You imagine the scene. Cece in a simple linen dress, hair undone, toes trailing through the shallows. Irma beside her, sleeves rolled, daring her to leap. No guards, no courtiers, just two women wrapped in a moment that belonged entirely to themselves. The world, with all its rules and expectations, far away. Your mind drifts to Cece's poetry. She wrote hundreds of verses, many hidden in coded diaries, or slipped into books that would never be catalogued in the Imperial Library. Her lines are sharp, full of longing and rebellion, a refusal to be tamed. "What is a crown," she writes in one poem, "but a chain if you are not free to love?" Her voice, on the page and in the world, is unmistakable. Fierce, mournful, funny in places, as if she laughs at her own longing. You leaf through more letters. Some are for men, cousins, doctors, friends who treated her like a person rather than a porcelain relic. But the most tender are always for her ladies. You read, "Irma, Ida, Marie. If I vanish tomorrow, let it be known that it was in your company I found peace. No empress ever loved her friend so fiercely." The ink is smudged, a tear or a careless elbow. You cannot tell which. A clock in the palace strikes midnight. You hear the distant clatter of horses' hooves on cobblestones, the echo of Vienna continuing its dance long after the court has retreated. Cece sets down her pen, stretching her arms above her head, her profile illuminated in the candlelight. She rises and paces barefoot through the tiny room, her mind working through troubles she'll never voice to Franz Joseph or the council. You sense her longing for escape, for her endless journeys across Europe, her disguises, her hours on horseback galloping faster than her fears could follow. Yet always she returns to these letters, to the friends who see her not as a myth but as a woman. Imperfect, yearning, stubbornly alive. You step into her dressing chamber, running your fingers along the row of boots, the racks of dresses, each piece chosen with the care of someone who knows how to armour herself against a hostile world. There, in a drawer lined with lavender sachets, you find more letters, folded and refolded, the corners worn. Some are signed only with initials, others are marked by pressed flowers, locks of hair, tokens of intimacy too risky for public knowledge. You read a note from Marie, her Hungarian confidant. "Elizabeth, you showed me the shape of my own courage. I would have followed you to the ends of the earth." Cece's reply, scrawled hastily in the margin. "And you, my dearest, brought me home when I could not find the way." There's a sweetness here, yes, but also the heavy gravity of sorrow. You remember that Cece, despite her beauty and wit, was pursued by loss. Her son Rudolph's tragic death, the constant sniping of the court, the sense that every freedom she tasted was balanced by a fresh constraint. Yet her letters glow with gratitude for the moments of solace she found in friendship, and perhaps in love. You drift back to the writing room as Cece sits again, pen poised, staring out at the night. She begins another letter, "To my heart's companion," and hesitates, as if searching for the courage to finish the thought. Finally she writes, "I am never so alive as when I am with you." She blots the page, careful and deliberate, and places the letter in a box with others, her own secret history, richer than anything the state will ever record. The candle burns low. You sense that Cece, for all her unrest, was a master of the fleeting sanctuary. A touch, a look, a shared joke. These were the real luxuries in a world of glittering burdens. And you, drifting through the shadows, are left with the certainty that her greatest rebellion was not in defying the Empire, but in claiming the right to be loved in all the ways her heart could manage. You close the lid on her box of letters and slip back through the corridors. The palace is still and vast. Outside, the city waits for dawn, but you know you have just witnessed the most precious hours, the ones that pass unremarked, except in secret ink and the flutter of a heart that refuses to settle. As you disappear down the hallway, you carry the hush of Cece's confessions within you, a constellation of gentle, persistent lights that refuse to be extinguished. You have learned that even the loneliest empress may find a companion to meet her where the night is deepest, and that the true power of her story is how it still glimmers, secret and unbroken, behind closed doors. You linger beneath the flickering lanterns of Madrid's royal palace, where the night feels thick with the scent of orange blossom and old stone, and the moon leans in close, pale and listening. Here, in the early 20th century, Spain is a kingdom in slow-motion collapse, empire dwindling, revolution whispering at the gates, but inside these grand halls the music still plays, and Alfonso XIII, the last great Bourbon king, moves through his midnight waltz. You wander past tapestries faded to soft blue and gold, echoing with centuries of royal footsteps and softer, unrecorded conversations. The ballroom tonight glows with hundreds of candles, their light bouncing off gilt mirrors and making the faces of the guests look half angelic, half devilish, as they dance and drink and drift into conspiratorial pairs. But you do not follow the crowd to the waltzing couples. Instead, your steps lead you toward a set of double doors just slightly ajar, where laughter drifts through, lower and warmer than the polite pleasantries of the main floor. You slip inside, a drawing room done in dark green velvet scattered with the remains of a supper, a half-empty bottle of Rioja, and a handful of cigarette butts smouldering in a silver dish. The king is here, sprawled at ease on a chaise, his tie askew, his crown, such as it is, nowhere in sight. Alfonso is not alone. At his feet a young bullfighter leans against the chaise, his jacket open, the fine linen of his shirt rumpled from the night's dancing. On a nearby sofa, a woman, her hair cropped in the Parisian style, her dress the colour of Merlot, smiles over her wine glass at something Alfonso has just whispered. There is an intimacy here, an ease that the public will never witness. The king's laughter is open, throaty, unguarded as he leans to pour more wine for his companions. You see the way his hand lingers on the bullfighter's shoulder, the casual warmth in his eyes as he teases the woman about her scandalous French poetry. It is clear that here, in the hush between politics and protocol, he is simply a man among friends. Lovers, perhaps, or confidants, or something more tangled and less easily named. A historian, writing decades later, will try to draw boundaries around Alfonso's heart, labelling his relationships, measuring his legacy in mistresses and scandals. But standing here, you realise the truth was always more fluid, more human, than the ledgers of court gossip suggest. You drift to the edge of the group, invisible in the golden lamplight, and listen as they trade stories. The bullfighter recalls his first corrida, voice shaking just a little on the dangerous parts, and Alfonso's smile turns fond, almost paternal. Then the king glances at the woman, and suddenly the atmosphere shifts. Her laughter becomes richer, more knowing, and the silence between them brims with private memory. You understand, watching them, that this is not a love triangle, not exactly. but a constellation, each relationship illuminating and shadowing the others. They are bound not by possession but by choice, by the rare courage to let affection bloom where it will. Outside, the night deepens. A servant enters with a fresh tray of olives and chocolates, and Alfonso waves him away with a wink, eager to reclaim the precious, unchaperoned hush. The three lean closer together, heads bent, voices low, as if weaving a spell to keep the world at bay. In this half-lit cocoon, the king confesses what he never would on the throne or in public, that he is tired, afraid, and sometimes very lonely. The woman offers her hand, palm up, and Alfonso takes it. The bullfighter, not to be left out, rests his head briefly against the king's knee. For a moment you see three people suspended in time, each one a safe harbour for the others. It is almost funny, you think, how history so often demands a single narrative, a king with a mistress, a scandal with a moral. But the real story is this: the warmth of a shared laugh, the forgiveness in a gentle touch, the ordinary miracle of being known and accepted in the secret hours. The king rises, stretches, and suggests they dance. The woman sets down her wine and twirls into his arms, her laughter sparkling, and the bullfighter soon joins, taking Alfonso's other hand as the three of them move together in a clumsy, joyous triangle. There is no orchestra, only the faint echo of music from the ballroom and their own laughter swirling beneath the chandeliers. You drift to a window and gaze out across the palace gardens, their fountains shining silver in the moonlight. Somewhere, far below, a cat slips through the hedges, silent as a thought. The city, restless with change, waits beyond the walls, but inside, the world holds its breath, allowing one more night of peace before everything begins to unravel. As dawn creeps along the horizon, the group collapses in a heap on the velvet sofas, the king telling a risky joke in the lisping Spanish of his childhood. The woman throws a pillow at him. The bullfighter pretends to be scandalized, then kisses Alfonso's hand in mock apology. The scene is ridiculous and deeply, achingly sweet. Eventually the guests begin to stir. The woman, her head now pillowed in Alfonso's lap, whispers a promise to return before the next bullfight. The bullfighter, his voice husky with fatigue, assures the king that he will write. Alfonso, his eyes shining, holds them both close in a long silent embrace that feels like the last dance at a wedding. You realize, watching, that the king's legacy will be complicated. He will be remembered for losing a kingdom, for failing to modernize, for exiling himself when Spain could not contain him. But here, in this last waltz, you see another truth. One measured not in conquests or treaties, but in the capacity to love freely, generously, without apology. As the sun rises, golden light pouring over the city's red rooftops, Alfonso walks his companions to the door. There are no titles here, no masks, just three people who, for a few hours, belonged only to themselves and each other. The king closes the door softly behind them, then stands for a long moment in the quiet, eyes closed, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. You linger in the now empty room, sunlight glancing off half-drained wine glasses and the glittering buckles of the bullfighter's shoes. You can almost hear the echoes of laughter, the hush of voices sharing fears and dreams in the hour when truth feels safe. There is a kind of holiness here, a benediction for every hidden desire ever cradled in royal hands. Stepping back through the palace, you find the walls themselves seem to pulse with memory. The secret waltz, the shared solitude, the courage it took for a king to love in the open, even if only for a night. You imagined future historians combing through these rooms, finding little evidence but feeling all the same the hush of something vital, gentle, and true. The city wakes, restless and hungry, ready to challenge the old world. The king will soon don his crown, his armour, his practiced smile, and face whatever comes. But you, slipping into the morning's gold, carry away the certainty that the true legacy of Alfonso XIII is not the crown he lost, but the love he dared to claim in the shadows. You pause at the threshold of history's twilight, letting the hush settle over your shoulders as you gaze out over the centuries. The torches are guttering low now, palaces stand half in shadow, courtyards cool and empty, the last dance long finished. In this final chamber you rest among the twilight confessions of power, where crowns are set aside and only secrets remain. You sit on the cold marble of a forgotten throne room, running your fingers over the smooth stone worn by generations. The air is rich with the lingering scents of wax, parchment and lavender, the last traces of nights when desire eclipsed duty and longing became the true ruler of empires. You remember every story that's led you here, the velvet shadows of Versailles, thick with the perfume of longing and the shuffle of silken shoes, the quicksilver glances in Tudor England, where even the most armoured of queens risked their hearts in whispered notes, the masked soirees of the Stuarts, where longing tiptoed behind every disguise and love crept in by candlelight. All those rooms and gardens and tented battlefields, each moment a small defiance, a private rebellion against the world's demand for simplicity. Monarchs who wore their crowns as shields, yet could not help but set them aside when the night deepened and trust crept close. You feel the echo of Christina of Sweden, choosing exile and poetry over submission, loving fiercely and never with apology. You recall Cosimo in the Medici gardens, weaving devotion between the lines of a poem, and Louis IV on The Sun King, glimpsing himself reflected not just in gilded mirrors, but in the eyes of a brother, a friend, a lover. Catherine the Great, who let her empires expand and contract but clung in the small hours to the gentle hands of those who soothed her. Jahangir in his perfumed harem, Nur Jahan and the musician threading their affection like silk through the warp and weft of power. Marie Antoinette, slipping away from the harsh lights of Versailles into the quiet arms of a confidant. Napoleon, whose battles for the world could not compare to the quiet ache for one man's companionship in a lonely tent. Victoria, finding in friendship the tenderness no crown could command. Wilhelm, who left behind not just armies and iron, but a trembling plea to be remembered as more than a symbol. Edward, dancing through midnight salons in London, seeking rest in the comfort of a hidden hand. Cece pouring her heart onto fragile paper and sending it out into the world like bottled hope, trusting someone somewhere would keep her words safe. Alfonso, the last Bourbon, spinning through one more waltz, his heart and arms open to love that never asked for titles or permission. In this soft, flickering gloom, you realise you have travelled the secret highways of the heart, all the ways monarchs have tried, and sometimes managed, to love beyond the boundaries the world tried to set. You rise and wander to a tall window. Night has fallen fully now, cloaking the world in peace. For the first time, the throne room is truly still. You feel the ghosts of those you followed tonight, not as rulers, but as souls hungry for acceptance, belonging, and the brief bright warmth of understanding. It's almost funny how history tries to press everything into neat columns, battles, dates, dynasties, when so much of life happened in the spaces between. The half-remembered caress in a moonlit hallway, the brush of a hand beneath a banquet table, the secret letters pressed into pillowcases, still scented faintly with longing centuries later. You sense them all around you, the heartbeat of those who dared to love, quietly or riotously, with courage or trembling, but always truly. You realise their greatest confessions were never the ones they made to chroniclers or confessors, but the ones they entrusted to each other, trusting that somehow the world might one day understand. You take a seat on the wide windowsill, letting your eyes grow heavy as you look out over the rooftops and gardens, the rivers that carried so many stories away into legend. The moon is full tonight, bright enough to turn every courtyard silver and make every shadow seem gentle. You remember a line from one of Cece's hidden poems. "To be seen as I am, for 1 hour, is worth a lifetime in the crown's shadow." Perhaps that is the truest legacy any monarch can hope for. As sleep begins to tug at you, you listen to the silence not as emptiness, but as a final lullaby. The kind sung by the world when it's ready to forgive, when it finally understands that love, of all kinds, for all kinds, is the one story it can never truly silence. Let yourself settle now, deeper and softer, into the comfort of this long, gentle night. Feel the hush of marble halls behind you, the warmth of candlelit rooms growing faint, the sense of lavender, parchment, and polished wood floating on the slow drift of memory. Your breath slows, your body relaxing as the weight of crowns and confessions dissolves in the cool, sweet air. All around you, the world narrows to a single peaceful space, a quiet chamber where no judgment lingers, only acceptance and understanding. Think of every monarch you've walked beside tonight, not as rulers but as travellers, searching for the same peace you seek now. Each found, in their own way, a fragment of gentleness amid the storms of power. Each, for a moment, dared to hope for a love not bound by law or legend. Their secrets, once heavy, now float like feathers on the breeze. Outside your window, the moon sails higher, lighting the rooftops with the calm assurance that tomorrow will come, new and forgiving. You're safe here, with your heart unburdened, your mind unhurried. Let the echoes of soft laughter and quiet confessions carry you into the deepest rest. There's nothing more to prove, no more masks to wear, only the steady, soothing certainty that, like all those who came before you, you are enough, exactly as you are. Sink down and let sleep claim you. Good night from the quietest corners of history, right here on Historian's Diary. Sweet dreams.